It happened on a Sunday night, a family dinner, candles lit, wine poured, and then my son picked up a bowl of boiling soup and poured it over my head. I didn't scream. I didn't fight back. I just sat there, feeling it burn through my scalp, dripping down my face, soaking the gray hair I had styled so carefully that afternoon. 20 people watched me, my son, my daughter-in-law, my own parents, and not one of them moved. Not one of them said, "Stop." They just sat there and clapped. That was the moment I realized my family didn't just stop loving me, they'd stopped seeing me. But here's what they didn't know. I came to that dinner with more than dignity in my purse. I came with justice, and when I left, everything they owned, everything they thought was theirs, was gone. Because sometimes a woman breaks quietly, and sometimes she breaks the whole damn system that made her invisible. If this story touches something deep inside you, hit the like button, subscribe for more true confessions, and stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. So, let's begin this story. My name is Naomi Vance, and I suppose every story has a beginning. Though mine didn't start the night a plate of boiling soup poured over my head, it began long before that, decades before. The soup was just the final act, the curtain falling on a play I never agreed to perform in. If you had seen me that night, sitting there at my son's long oak table, surrounded by people who carried my blood, but not my love, you might have thought I was a guest. Maybe an unwanted one. My gray hair pinned neatly, my beige dress pressed and proper, the same careful posture I'd been holding my whole life. Polite, contained, invisible. People think invisibility is something that happens suddenly, a trick, a spell, a choice. But it isn't. It's slow. It's years of being spoken over, forgotten in family photos, thanked for helping when you did everything, blamed when you did nothing. You don't even realize it's happening until one day someone pours scalding soup on your head and you understand. They never saw you as human in the first place. That night, I sat still as the broth burned down my neck. The scent of chicken and celery mixed with my perfume, a fragrance I'd saved for months to buy. 20 pairs of eyes watched, and not one hand reached for a towel. Not one word of shock, not even from my son, Marcus, the man standing above me, smirking like a spoiled child caught in his own tantrum. "You have 10 minutes to get out of my house," he said. 10 minutes to get out of my family. I remember the applause that followed. I remember Chloe's fake, precise clapping, the kind of sound you'd hear at a play's final scene, and I remember how everyone joined in. It should have broken me. But instead, something inside me hardened into diamond. I looked at Marcus and thought, you weren't born cruel. You were trained to be this way, and I knew who had trained him. When I was a little girl, the house I grew up in had enough rooms for silence to hide in. My mother, Denise, loved the kind of quiet that made people behave. She used to say, "Don't make noise unless it's praise." My father, Elijah, said little, but when he did, his words were law. He believed in order, discipline, control. He raised his voice only for Marcus, his pride, his heir, his boy who would carry the Vance name. And me? I was the background noise, a polite, well-behaved girl who learned early that praise had to be earned twice as hard and still might never come. I remember Christmas mornings more clearly than birthdays. Birthdays were quiet, almost embarrassing things for me. But Christmas, that's when you could measure love by the wrapping paper count. Marcus always won. He'd tear open boxes of toys, bikes, gadgets, his laughter echoing like an anthem to favoritism. And me, I'd smile, pretending the oversized hand-me-down sweater from my aunt was exactly what I'd wanted, mustard yellow, itchy, and smelling faintly of mothballs. "Say thank you, Naomi," Mom would remind me, and I always did. Because invisible girls learn early, gratitude is survival. But there was one person who saw me. My grandfather, Dr. Reginald Vance. He was the only man who ever looked at me as if I took up space worth having. A retired surgeon with gentle hands and sharper eyes, he carried the kind of grace that comes from both success and regret. He'd let me sit beside him in his study while he read his medical journals, the smell of old paper and jasmine tea filling the air. "You have fire in your eyes, Naomi," he told me once when I was 13. "Don't let anyone put it out." I didn't understand what he meant then, but I memorized it anyway, tucked it somewhere deep inside, for a time when I'd need it most. When I told him I wanted to become a doctor like him, he didn't laugh. He didn't question it. He just nodded and said, "Then you will be. And when you are, they'll finally see what they let slip away." But they never did. At 18, when I got accepted into a medical program on a full scholarship, something no one in my family had ever done, my mother's reaction was a half-hearted, "That's nice, dear." My father just muttered, "You'll be busy then." And Marcus laughed. He told me, "Women drop out of med school all the time. It's too much pressure. You'll be home before the second semester. I wish I could tell you I proved them wrong out of some noble desire to succeed." But the truth is, I was fueled by anger, the slow, cold kind that simmers for years. Every exam I aced, every sleepless night I survived, every patient I helped later in life, it was all built from the bricks of their indifference. My grandfather celebrated me the way a parent should. He took me to dinner the night I got my acceptance letter. "To Dr. Naomi," he toasted, raising a glass of orange juice, "the woman who will show the world what she's made of." I still remember the light in his eyes, like I'd already succeeded. Those years were brutal. I worked night shifts, studied until my hands trembled, slept in library chairs between lectures. I couldn't afford to fail, not because failure meant losing a dream, but because it meant giving my family another reason to say they were right. Marcus, meanwhile, went to college too, business administration, paid in full by my parents. He dropped out twice, changed majors once, and finally scraped through after 9 long years. And yet, when he graduated, my parents threw a grand party with music, catering, the works. When I graduated from medical school, Grandpa took me out to dinner, just the two of us. No fanfare, no cake, just peace. And his words, "True family isn't blood, Naomi. It's whoever recognizes your light when everyone else is blind." Those words would echo years later, the night I stood dripping with soup and vengeance. By 38, I was chief of cardiovascular surgery at Metropolitan General Hospital, one of the youngest in the country to hold that title. I thought maybe, finally, they'd notice. I called my mother. "Mom, I was promoted. Chief of cardiovascular surgery." She paused. "Oh, that's nice, honey. I'm glad. Listen, we're hosting a dinner for Marcus tonight. He found new investors for his company. Call you later?" She never did. I sat in my apartment that night, surrounded by silence, the kind that presses on your chest, the kind that makes even your heartbeat sound lonely. Then my phone rang. Grandpa. He said, "Naomi, my brilliant girl. They don't deserve to be proud of you, but I am, and someday they'll understand what they lost." I didn't understand what he meant. Not then. But I would, because within 10 years Marcus would lose everything, and I'd be the one standing in the ashes, not out of revenge, but out of something colder, something sharper, justice. People like Marcus don't fail loudly. They fail elegantly, cushioned by excuses. One failed business became 2, then 5. Each one a new big idea, each one bankrolled by my parents. Sportswear, app startups, real estate, all doomed from the start. But somehow, Marcus always landed on his feet, always the golden boy. I built lives in the operating room, he built lies in boardrooms, and yet my mother still said, "He's finding his way." Finding his way, at 40. When he married Chloe, a woman with a pageant smile and polished manners, my parents spent $100,000 on the wedding. I was seated at the back table, near the restrooms, far from the family. I didn't cry. I just stared at the lights above the dance floor and thought, this is what invisibility feels like when it grows up. Grandpa sat beside me, old now, his eyes softer. "Patience," he whispered. "Everything comes at its own time." I didn't know he meant his death, or that it would change everything. When Grandpa died at 88, something in me broke that could never be repaired. At the funeral, I stood beside his casket, whispering, "You were the only one who ever saw me." My parents wept politely. Marcus checked his phone. Chloe fixed her lipstick in the reflection of her compact mirror. After the service, a lawyer approached me, Mr. Sterling, an older man with a briefcase that looked older than both of us. "Dr. Vance," he said quietly, "your grandfather left specific instructions. I must meet with you privately." My mother tried to interrupt, of course, but Mr. Sterling was immovable. "Mrs. Vance, your father was clear. I am to meet with Dr. Vance alone," and that was the beginning of the end. When Mr. Sterling came to my office 2 days later, he placed 3 briefcases on my desk. I offered him coffee. He declined. "Your grandfather loved you deeply," he began, "and he wanted to ensure his legacy ended up in the right hands." "What legacy?" I asked. He opened the first case. "Dr. Vance, your grandfather's entire estate, totaling approximately $4.3 million, is now yours. The house, the art, the securities, the medical library, everything." I froze. "Everything?" He nodded. "Your parents receive $100,000 each, your brother Marcus $10,000, and a letter." It took me a full minute to breathe again. "Why?" I asked. "Why would he do this?" Mr. Sterling's answer was simple. Because he saw everything. The way they treated you, the way they worshipped your brother. He saw how you built yourself from nothing while they spent their lives waiting for handouts. This was his way of correcting the imbalance. And then he said something that would haunt me later. "Your grandfather left a message for you. Don't be afraid of the coming storm, Naomi. You are stronger than all of them put together." At the time, I didn't understand what storm he meant, but 2.5 years later I found out. It came disguised as a dinner invitation. When Chloe called, her voice was honey. "Naomi, it's been too long. Marcus and I want to invite you for dinner, just the family, to make peace." A word that sounded sweet, but in her mouth tasted like poison. I almost said no. I should have said no, but something inside me, maybe that invisible girl still begging to be seen, whispered, "What if this time is different?" So, I said yes. And on Saturday evening, I drove to their house, my hair carefully styled, my heart carefully armored. I didn't know it then, but I was walking straight into the storm Grandpa warned me about. And that storm began, as all my storms do, with silence. The night air outside Marcus's house felt heavier than I remembered. It was one of those fall evenings when the sky sits low, swollen with unshed rain. The street lamps threw a dull, yellow light on the wet driveway as I stepped out of my car, clutching a bottle of Cabernet. Not because I wanted to gift it, but because it was the polite thing to do. Years of invisible obedience die slowly. I stood there for a moment before knocking, looking at the house that once stood as a symbol of everything my parents thought mattered: appearance, stability, family. But the paint on the shutters was fading, and a section of the porch railing had splintered. That's when I noticed something new. A second car, sleek and unfamiliar. It wasn't Marcus's or my parents'. Someone else was here. The thought should have alarmed me, but it didn't. Instead, it confirmed what I already suspected. This dinner wasn't about reconciliation. It was an event, and I was the unwilling centerpiece. When Chloe opened the door, she looked like she'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. Lavender dress, perfect curls, the scent of something expensive wafting behind her. Her smile stretched wide, too white, too controlled. "Naomi!" she exclaimed, as if we were long-lost sisters. "You look incredible." I forced a small smile. "Thanks, Chloe." "You too." She stepped aside. Come in. Everyone's waiting inside." The air smelled of roast chicken and rosemary. The table was set like a holiday ad: candles, linen napkins, silver cutlery, even matching wine glasses. Nothing about it said casual family dinner. And everyone was dressed too well for a simple evening together. My mother wore emerald earrings I didn't remember, her hair curled and lacquered into place. My father's tie was perfectly knotted, and even Marcus, whose version of formal used to be jeans without holes, had traded his usual smug carelessness for a neatly pressed shirt. Something about the symmetry of it all, the way they stood waiting, made me feel like a guest in a staged performance. "Naomi," Mom said, stepping forward. Her hug was brief, stiff, perfumed with pretense. "You look thinner. You should eat more. Work's been keeping you too busy, I imagine." "I manage," I said. Marcus entered from the kitchen carrying a wine bottle. "Sister," he greeted with exaggerated warmth. "Thanks for coming." "It means a lot." His eyes darted across me quickly, calculating, rehearsing. I'd seen that look before, the same look he gave investors before convincing them to trust him with their money. "Thank you for inviting me," I replied evenly. He smiled. "Family should never stay divided, right?" Right, I thought, unless family's the one holding the knife. We sat down to eat. The food was beautiful. Roasted chicken, glazed carrots, buttery potatoes, the kind of meal that hides a bad motive behind good taste. For a few minutes, the only sound was the clinking of silverware. The silence stretched, uncomfortably polite. Then, as if on cue, my father cleared his throat. "Naomi," he began, "your mother and I have been talking. About the past, about how we might have done some things poorly. That word again, soft enough to sound harmless, vague enough to mean nothing. Mom picked up the cue. "We realize maybe we weren't as fair with you growing up. That we favored Marcus. We see that now," she said it like a dentist discussing a mild cavity. Clinical, detached. Marcus nodded solemnly, setting down his fork. "It's true. I was a jerk. To you, to everyone. I didn't appreciate what I had. But I've been working on myself. Therapy, meditation, you name it. I didn't believe a word of it." His voice carried that familiar cadence, the one he used in business pitches. I folded my napkin slowly, keeping my tone neutral. "I appreciate you saying that." Chloe leaned forward, clasping her hands together like a well-rehearsed actress ready for her cue. "We want to rebuild, Naomi. Truly. Start over as a family. No resentment, no grudges." "That would be nice," I said, though my pulse was starting to race. "If it's real?" Marcus chuckled, too quickly. "It is. In fact, we've been thinking of doing something together. A project. Something meaningful that honors Grandpa's memory." There it was, the first crack in the porcelain. "What kind of project?" I asked, even though I already knew. "A holistic medical clinic," he said smoothly, "combining modern and alternative therapies. Mind, body, and soul, the whole thing. I've been doing a ton of research. The industry's booming. The only thing we need is someone credible in medicine. Someone like me," I said. His grin widened. "Exactly. You'd bring legitimacy, investors would line up, and of course we'd want you to have ownership, a real partnership. You'd be the heart of it." The word heart carried irony even he didn't notice. "And how much," I asked slowly, "would this partnership require from me?" Marcus hesitated, then, with a practiced sigh, he said, "Well, to start, maybe around 300,000. It's just seed funding. Once it's off the ground, it'll multiply. We'll all win." Chloe jumped in before I could respond. "We'd all invest something. Your parents are offering the property as collateral. Marcus and I have some savings, and you'd be the cornerstone. 300,000. I remembered the exact figure from years ago, the total of Marcus's unpaid debts. Not a coincidence. "I see," I said. "And what happens if the business fails?" "It won't," Marcus said, his smile tightening. "But even if it did, we'd still be family." We'd face it together, that word again. Family. A word they'd used like a leash my whole life. My father leaned in. "You have to understand, Naomi. Your grandfather left you everything." That wasn't fair. He didn't mean for it to divide us. I think he'd want you to use it for something that brings the family together again. I stared at him, my chest heavy with the irony of it all. "You mean he'd want me to use the money he gave me because he knew you'd misuse it? To fund the same man who's lost everything he's ever touched?" The tension broke the surface then. Chloe's smile flickered. Marcus's jaw tensed. My mother looked down at her plate, as though she could hide inside it. "You're misunderstanding everything," Marcus said. "This isn't about money. It's about healing, about finally being a family again." I laughed quietly. "Then why does your definition of healing cost exactly $300,000? He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. "Tell me, Marcus, how much debt are you in now? How many new companies have you started with other people's money?" His face froze, the practiced composure cracking. Mom's voice turned sharp. "Naomi, that's enough." "He's trying. You always assume the worst." "Because the worst is all he's ever given," I snapped before I could stop myself. "You call this dinner a peace offering, but it's a negotiation. And I've been the product you've been selling my whole life." "Ungrateful," Mom hissed. "After everything we've done for you, what have you done?" My voice shook, but not with fear. With 40 years of quiet rage finally learning how to speak. "You raised me in Marcus's shadow, then blamed me for standing in my own light." Marcus slammed his hand on the table. "God, there it is again, the victim act. You've always played that card. Poor Naomi, the forgotten genius. Maybe if you weren't so self-righteous, people would actually like you." I met his eyes. "Maybe if you weren't so dependent, you'd have earned a single thing in your life." The room fell silent again. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence before something breaks. I could see it building in Marcus, the flush climbing his neck, the flicker of something unstable in his gaze. I'd seen that look before, too, when he was a teenager, punching walls after losing football games. "You think you're better than everyone," he said. "You've always thought that. You hide behind your degrees and your white coat, pretending you're some kind of saint." "No," I said quietly. "I just stopped pretending." For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then his hand shot out, not toward me, but toward the soup bowl in front of him. Time slowed. I watched it lift, the steam rising in a soft curl before the liquid poured down over me. It hit like fire, scalding, searing. The smell of chicken broth and celery filled my nose. I felt it drip down my face, soak into my hair, sting my scalp. My first instinct wasn't to scream. It was to breathe, to stay still. Because the shock wasn't the pain, it was the silence. No one moved. Not my mother, not my father, not even Chloe. Then, slowly, deliberately, Chloe began to clap. One sharp sound, then another. Then others joined in, people I hadn't even realized were watching from the adjoining room. Marcus's friends, investors maybe, witnesses to his public humiliation of me. The applause rose like a cruel wave, crashing in my ears. I stood. The napkin in my hand was soaked. I dabbed my face, wiped away a stray piece of carrot that clung to my shoulder. My reflection in the wine glass was blurred, but I didn't need to see myself to know. I was done being invisible. 67 years of being silent had led to this moment, but this time, silence belonged to them. I reached into my purse and felt the smooth edge of a manila envelope, one I'd brought not out of superstition, but instinct, because some part of me had always known this day would come. I dropped it onto the table. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. Papers spilled, wills, deeds, documents. "Correct," I said calmly, my voice cold enough to slice through their applause. 10 minutes. That's how long it'll take before everything that's yours disappears." Marcus froze, soup still dripping from his hand. "What?" "You wanted a show?" I said. "So let's give your audience the ending they deserve." The fire in my eyes, the one Grandpa saw when I was 13, had never gone out. It had just been waiting for this exact night to burn. The applause died slowly, like rain running out of strength. A few nervous laughs hung in the air, the kind people give when they don't yet understand they've witnessed something irreversible. I stood there, soup dripping down my gray-streaked hair, my scalp still burning, but I didn't flinch. Years of operating rooms had trained my body for worse. Blood, chaos, the pressure of life or death in a single heartbeat, so standing here, in a dining room full of cowards, I felt strangely calm, detached almost. Marcus's smirk faltered when I didn't cry, didn't yell, didn't crumble. He looked confused, like a child who'd broken a toy that refused to stay broken. "What is this?" he finally asked, nodding toward the papers scattered across the table. "That," I said evenly, "is the end of your little empire." Chloe leaned forward, still clutching her wine glass. Her lipstick was perfect, but her hands trembled. "Naomi, this isn't funny. I'm not joking." I gestured toward the papers. "Those are copies of Grandpa Reginald's will. The one that left everything to me. You remember that, don't you? The one you tried and failed to contest?" Marcus's face twisted. "We already know the damn will." "Of course you do," I said, picking up one of the sheets and handing it to Chloe. "But your guests don't. Why don't you read the part where Grandpa explains why you only got $10,000? "I don't have to. Read it," I snapped. The word cut through the room, sharp as a scalpel. For a moment I saw it, the flicker of fear behind Marcus's bravado. He'd never seen me angry before, not like this. He'd mistaken my composure for weakness his entire life. Tonight, he'd learn the difference. Chloe unfolded the document with trembling fingers and began to read. Her voice was quiet at first, then steadier as the words took shape. "To my grandson, Marcus Vance, I leave the sum of $10,000 and a letter. Marcus, I have watched you waste opportunity after opportunity. I have watched you take without gratitude, demand without effort, and treat your sister with contempt. The $10,000 is more than you have ever earned honestly. Learn the value of work before it is too late." When she reached the end, Chloe looked up, her eyes flicking between Marcus and me. The room had gone deathly still. The men and women in the adjoining living room, the so-called friends who had been watching like theater patrons, stood frozen, pretending to check their phones, pretending not to care. Marcus's jaw tightened. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "No," I said softly. "Enjoyment is temporary. This is justice." I took another paper from the stack. Thicker, heavier. "You see, Grandpa didn't just leave me his money. He left me information. About you." Marcus's shoulders stiffened. "Information?" I nodded. "He hired investigators, accountants, lawyers. He spent 3 years gathering every record of your debts, your loans, your failed ventures. He knew you'd try to come for me one day, Marcus. He knew this dinner was inevitable." "Stop," my mother hissed. "You're ruining everything." "Ruining?" I turned to her, calm as a surgeon mid-procedure. "No, Mom. I'm just revealing the rot you've been pretending wasn't there." I picked up another document, this one a bank statement. "Marcus, do you recognize this? It's your loan statement from Prestige Lending, $75,000, a second mortgage you took out 18 months ago, without telling Chloe." Chloe frowned. "What second mortgage?" Marcus's face went pale. "She's lying." "I'm not," I said, sliding the document toward her. "There's your signature, your social, your address. You're 2 months behind on payments. When the bank forecloses, they'll take this house." Chloe snatched the papers, scanning them in disbelief. "You mortgaged our house? Without telling me?" "It was for the business," Marcus said, panic creeping into his voice. "It was temporary." "Temporary?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "At 25% interest?" Gasps rippled through the guests. I wasn't sure whether they were shocked by the number or by the fact that I knew it. Marcus lunged forward, trying to grab the papers, but I stepped back quickly. My voice dropped, cold and surgical. "Touch me again and I'll call the police. And trust me, with everything I have here, they'll be very interested in speaking to you." He froze, his breath ragged. I lifted another set of pages, red folder, thick spine. "This one's my favorite. A list of your fraudulent business transactions, loans you took out with false income reports, clients you scammed through your so-called consulting firm, and a former partner suing you for embezzling $45,000. "You don't know what you're talking about," Marcus muttered. "Oh, I do," I said. Because Grandpa did. And then I verified every piece of it myself. Chloe stared at him, her voice barely a whisper. Tell me this isn't true. Marcus didn't answer. His silence was louder than any confession. She stood suddenly, her chair scraping across the floor. You dragged me into this. You lied to me about everything. The house, the money, the business. He reached for her arm, but she recoiled as if he'd burned her. Don't touch me. Her voice broke as she turned to me. Naomi, I didn't know. I swear I didn't. I believe you, I said simply. She grabbed her purse and walked out without another word. The door slammed behind her. Moments later, her car engine roared to life, the tires squealing as she sped away. Marcus stood there staring at the door, his face drained of all color. For the first time in my life, he looked small. Not the golden boy, not the confident failure. Just a frightened man whose kingdom of lies had finally collapsed. My father broke the silence first. Naomi, that's enough. You've made your point. Have I? I turned to him, because I haven't even gotten to the best part. I pulled out one final folder, dark green, embossed with a legal seal. Do you remember those investors you all helped Marcus settle with years ago? The ones who sued him for fraud? The ones you paid off with hush money? Elijah's eyes narrowed. We handled that privately. Yes, you did. With a confidentiality agreement. But there's a clause in that agreement, one that voids it if Marcus ever commits another act of fraud. My mother's fork clattered onto her plate. What are you saying? I'm saying, I said slowly, that Marcus started another consulting company under a fake name. I have contracts, emails, bank transfers, all signed by him. And there are already 4 new victims. That means the original settlement is void. Those investors can reopen the case. Criminally, this time Marcus's eyes went wild. You wouldn't. Wouldn't I? I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and held it up. The red recording light blinked softly. This entire dinner has been recorded, including the part where you assaulted me in front of witnesses, including your own words admitting to fraud. Would you like to hear it? He went still, his mouth slightly open. The color drained completely from his face. I'm a surgeon, Marcus, I said, voice low. I don't raise my voice. I don't make threats I can't back up. I cut precisely where it hurts the most. He sank back into his chair, his hands shaking. I looked around the table, at my mother, pale and trembling, at my father, silent with shame, at the guests, pretending to look anywhere but at us. You wanted me out of this family, I said. You wanted to humiliate me. Congratulations, you've done both, because after tonight you will never see me again. But before I go, I'll give you what you gave me for 67 years, consequences. I reached into my purse one last time and pulled out a final document, a deed. I laid it flat on the table. This house, I said, tapping the paper, is mine. Marcus looked up, blinking in confusion. What? When you defaulted on your mortgages, the bank was ready to seize this property. I paid them $310,000 to clear it. As part of the agreement, they transferred ownership to me. Legally, this house belongs to me. The silence that followed was the loudest of all. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came out. My father's hands trembled where they rested on the table. I looked at Marcus. You have 10 minutes to understand what that means, because after that, I decide whether you stay here or leave with nothing. He stared at me, eyes glassy, voice breaking. You can't do this. I can, I said quietly. Because I learned from the best. I learned from the man who taught me that love without respect is just manipulation. And I learned from you how to take back everything that was ever stolen. I checked my watch. 9 minutes had passed since he'd thrown the soup. Naomi, please, my father said softly. He's your brother. I looked at him, the man whose silence had defined my life. No, Dad. He's your creation. I turned toward Marcus, meeting his tearful, panicked stare. I'm not cruel, Marcus. I'm disciplined. So here's your choice. You can stay here for 6 months, my house now, while you find a real job, Start paying off your debts and prove you can live like an adult. Rent will be $2,000 a month. If you pay on time and you show you've changed, I'll consider selling it back to you. If not, you'll leave. And for once, you'll finally know what it means to stand on your own." His mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Welcome to the real world, little brother. It doesn't care how special you think you are." And then I turned to my parents. "And as for you, I have something for you too." I took out a small envelope sealed neatly. I placed it on the table in front of them. Inside are 2 checks, $50,000 each. More than you ever invested in me. Consider it the last charity you'll ever receive from your daughter." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Naomi, you can't just—" "I can," I said softly, "and I am." I turned to leave. My heels clicked softly on the wooden floor, the only sound in the room besides my mother's quiet sobbing. At the doorway, I paused and looked back. Marcus sat slumped, soup drying on the floor around him. My parents stared down at the checks, as if holding their own failure in their hands. "You taught me to fight for scraps," I said. "Grandpa taught me to fight for truth. I chose the better teacher." I looked at my watch again. 10 minutes exactly. "My time's up," I said, "and everything that was yours has disappeared." Then I walked out the door, head high, heart light, and for the first time in my life, free. The night air outside their house was cold, not the kind that bites, but the kind that clears, the kind that strips away everything unnecessary. I remember the way the stars looked that evening, faint and distant, scattered across the black sky like dust on glass. I stood there, breathing deeply, the smell of roasted chicken and burned pride still clinging to my skin. My hair was stiff with dried broth. My scalp stung. My hands trembled. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't trembling from fear. I got into my car, closed the door, and sat there in silence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I laughed. Not a joyful laugh, not even a bitter one, just a quiet, exhausted sound that came from deep inside, the kind that only escapes when the weight you've carried for decades finally slides off your shoulders. For 67 years, I had been the quiet one, the obedient one, the invisible one. But that night I realized something that should have terrified me. I wasn't invisible anymore. And that meant they could never touch me again. When I got home, I ran the shower as hot as it would go. Steam filled the bathroom, fogging the mirror until I couldn't see my reflection. I undressed, let the water scald my skin, washing away the soup, the humiliation, the noise. But no matter how hot the water got, I couldn't wash away the memory of that applause. Those hollow claps echoing through the dining room like laughter at a funeral. I stayed under the water until my fingers wrinkled until I could barely stand. And when I stepped out, I felt lighter, like the woman I used to be had finally died and something stronger had taken her place. The next morning, I woke up to a dozen missed calls. My phone buzzed constantly for hours. My mother, my father, Marcus, each taking turns trying to patch the hole they'd torn through our family with fake concern and guilt-laced apologies. I didn't answer a single one. By noon, the text messages began to shift in tone, from "we just want to talk," to "you've gone too far," to "you've destroyed this family." I didn't reply to those either, because you can't destroy what was already broken, you can only stop pretending it was whole. Mr. Sterling called that afternoon. His tone, as always, was calm, steady, deliberate. "I heard there was a confrontation," he said carefully. "There was," I replied. "Do I need to prepare any legal paperwork?" "Not yet. He'll calm down." He paused, and I could almost hear the faint smile in his voice. "Your grandfather would have been proud of you, Dr. Vance, not because of the money or the will, but because you finally found your voice." I swallowed hard. It only took me 6 decades. "Justice doesn't spoil with time," he said. "It only ferments." That sentence stayed with me. The next few weeks unfolded like slow justice. Marcus called twice more, both times at strange hours, once around midnight, once before dawn. His voice was thick, slurred, desperate. "You can't just take everything from me," he said during the second call. "You can't do this to your own brother." "I didn't take anything," I told him. "I just stopped giving." He went quiet, then hung up. 2 weeks later, a letter from his lawyer arrived. Marcus had predictably tried to contest the house transfer. It took one phone call from Mr. Sterling to dissolve the case. The deed was airtight. Marcus couldn't fight me without drowning in his own paperwork. When I finally saw him again, 6 months later, it wasn't at a courtroom or a hospital or a family dinner. It was at the house. My house now. He stood on the porch with a rent check in his hand, head lowered, eyes tired. His hair had gone grayer, his arrogance thinner. 2,000, he said, holding out the envelope. I nodded, taking it without a word. He hesitated. "I'm working now. Sales, commission only, but it's honest." "That's good," I said. "Keep it that way." For a second, he looked like he wanted to say something else, maybe an apology, maybe an insult, but the words died before they reached his lips. He just nodded and walked away. And as I watched him go, I felt something unexpected. Not victory, not satisfaction, just peace. Because revenge wasn't the point anymore. It never really had been. It was about ending the story that had begun long before me, the one written in silence, favoritism, and blind devotion. My parents came next. They visited once, unannounced, 3 months after the dinner. My mother's face was drawn, her eyes red. My father stood a few feet behind her, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "Naomi," she said, her voice trembling, "please, let's talk." I didn't open the door all the way, just enough to see the shadows in their eyes. "There's nothing left to talk about," I said quietly. "We made mistakes," my father admitted. "We favored him. We thought he needed more help than you did." "You're right," I said. "He needed more help. But you never realized I needed love." My mother started crying. "You can't cut your family out forever." I thought about that for a long moment, then said, "Family cut me out first." And I closed the door. That was the last time I saw them. The months turned into years. I didn't notice the distance at first. It just happened quietly, like most endings do. The calls stopped. The letters stopped. Even the guilt faded. And in the silence they left behind, I started building something new. It began with a scholarship. One student, a young woman named Claire Ramirez, a medical student who reminded me painfully of myself. Quiet, brilliant, unsupported. Her father had left. Her mother worked 2 jobs, and yet she still graduated top of her class. When I met her during an outreach program, she said, "I'm trying to pay for medical school with 3 part-time jobs. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it." I remembered sitting in a library 20 years ago, crying over anatomy flashcards, thinking the exact same thing. "It's worth it," I told her. "You just need someone to see you." So I paid her full tuition, anonymously at first. Then, a few months later, I founded the Reginald Vance Foundation in my grandfather's name. Its purpose was simple, to help students like me, like Claire, invisible kids with visible dreams. In the first year, we sponsored 5 students. By the 3rd year, 47. And each time I handed out a scholarship, I felt like I was handing my younger self a second chance. A letter from the future saying, "You mattered. You always did." Sometimes I still think about that night, the soup, the applause, the way the heat of humiliation turned into the calm of clarity. Not because I miss it, but because it reminds me who I became after it. People often say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I think they're wrong. Revenge isn't a dish at all. It's a mirror. You hold it up, and the people who hurt you finally see themselves, without excuses, without masks. The truth doesn't need fire to burn. It burns all on its own. I was sitting in my office one evening, the sun setting through the wide windows, turning everything gold, when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It was Marcus. "I've been sober for a year, paid off another $20,000 in debt, still in sales. It's not much, but I'm trying. I wanted you to know that. Thank you for not throwing me out that night." I stared at the screen for a long time. My first instinct was to delete it. But then I didn't. Because maybe some debts don't need collecting. Maybe some lessons, once learned, are payment enough. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. Sometimes silence isn't punishment. It's peace. When I walk through my home now, the walls feel different. There are photos of my foundation's students, bright faces, hopeful eyes. There's one framed letter from a scholarship recipient that reads, "You don't know me, but you saved my dream." And above my desk hangs a small photograph, me and Grandpa, standing in his rose garden, sunlight filtering through the leaves. He's smiling, his hand on my shoulder. On the back, in his handwriting, are 5 words that shaped my life. "Don't let anyone dim you." I didn't, not anymore, because in the end, family isn't blood. Family is the person who sees your fire and says, "Keep burning." And that, I finally understood, was all I ever needed. It's been almost 8 years since that night. 8 years since the soup, the silence, and the applause that finally set me free. Time has an odd way of healing, not with grand gestures, not all at once, but with small mercies. The smell of coffee in the morning, the hum of a hospital hallway, the laughter of a stranger who reminds you that life keeps moving, no matter how heavy yesterday was. Sometimes I still wake up hearing the echo of that applause, the sound of betrayal disguised as celebration. But it doesn't hurt anymore. It's just a sound now, stripped of its power, like thunder after the lightning has already struck. What remains isn't the pain, it's the clarity. Every year, on the anniversary of Grandpa Reginald's passing, I visit his grave. It's a quiet cemetery on the outskirts of Boston, rows of weathered stones, trees that whisper when the wind passes through. I bring Jasmine, his favorite, and I talk to him, softly, as if he's still sitting across from me, sipping tea, wearing that same gentle smile. "Grandpa," I tell him, "you were right about everything. They did come for me. They did try to make me feel guilty. And you were right. I was stronger than all of them put together." I tell him about the foundation, about the 47 students that became 200, then 300, about the doctors, nurses, and surgeons who've graduated with his name attached to their scholarships. I tell him that his legacy didn't end with his death, it began with his faith in me. And sometimes when I'm done speaking, the wind shifts just slightly, and the chime hanging on the nearby oak branch rings, soft, clear, single. I like to think that's him saying, "I hear you, Naomi. Keep going." I don't talk to my parents anymore. Not out of hatred. That burned itself out long ago. It's simply unnecessary now. They live a few towns away. I know this because their Christmas cards still arrive every December, signed in the same careful handwriting, "Love, Mom and Dad." I don't reply. But I keep the cards. Because some ties don't need cutting. They just need to be left alone until they dissolve quietly on their own. Marcus still sends a message every few months. Updates mostly, proof of rent payments, occasionally a line or two about his job. He's a different man now. Smaller, humbler, quieter. His voice on the rare phone calls we've shared is hesitant, careful. Last winter he called to say thank you, not for the money or the leniency, but for something else. "For forcing me to face myself," he said. "It's strange. The worst night of my life ended up being the one that saved me." I didn't know what to say, so I just said, "Good." Because forgiveness isn't always spoken. Sometimes it's just not hanging up. At the hospital, people know me as Dr. Vance, Chief of Cardiovascular Surgery, the surgeon who rarely takes vacations, who stays late, who still writes her own case notes by hand. They don't know my story. They don't know that every time I save a life, I'm quietly saving that 13-year-old girl my parents forgot to notice. They see a doctor. I see a survivor. Every scar I've ever carried, emotional or otherwise, became part of the hands that hold the scalpel steady, because precision comes from pain. It teaches you to move carefully, to never waste a cut, To understand that even the smallest incision changes everything. That's what my life became. A series of deliberate incisions, not to destroy, to heal. A few months ago, a young resident, maybe 26, came into my office after a 12-hour shift. She was exhausted, on the verge of tears. "They said I don't have what it takes," she whispered, "that I'm too emotional to be a surgeon." I smiled, remembering every time someone had told me the same thing. "Then you're already better than most," I told her. "Because being emotional doesn't make you weak. It means you care enough to bleed for what matters. And that's the only kind of strength that lasts." Her shoulders relaxed. She smiled through her exhaustion. "Thank you, Dr. Vance." After she left, I sat there for a long time, thinking of Grandpa's words. Don't let anyone put out your fire. And for the first time, I realized something I never had before. The fire isn't just mine anymore. It's been passed on. To students, to doctors, to people who will never know the full story behind the name Reginald Vance Foundation. And that's how legacies work. Quietly, invisibly, until one day they're everywhere. Sometimes, on evenings when the hospital corridors go silent and I'm the last one left, I walk past the patient wing where the city lights spill through the tall glass windows. The reflections shimmer across the polished floors like small galaxies. That's when I think about the night of the dinner, about how humiliation and revenge turned into something far greater than I could have imagined. I used to think that revenge was the opposite of forgiveness. Now I know they're just different stages of freedom. Revenge gives you closure. Forgiveness gives you peace. And both are born from the same truth, that your worth was never theirs to define. Last week, one of the foundation students, Claire, the girl whose scholarship started it all, came to see me. She's a doctor now, a heart surgeon. She hugged me so tightly that for a second I couldn't breathe. "Dr. Vance," she said, tears glimmering in her eyes, "you changed my life." I smiled. "No, Claire, you changed your own." "I just saw you." She nodded. "Then thank you for seeing me." After she left, I sat by the window for a long time, watching the city hum below, and I thought about how strange it is, how pain, when faced fully, can transform into purpose, how silence, when broken, can echo far beyond the walls it was born in. That night, I went home to my quiet apartment, poured a glass of wine, and stood on the balcony. The city lights looked like constellations scattered at my feet. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel since I was a child. Contentment. Not the fragile kind that depends on other people's approval, the kind that grows in solitude and self-respect, the kind that doesn't need applause. I raised the glass toward the sky, toward wherever Grandpa might be watching. "To fire," I whispered, "to never dimming it." A breeze brushed against my face, carrying the faint scent of jasmine. And in that quiet moment, I could almost hear his voice again, steady, proud, gentle. "You've done well, my girl." I smiled, because I finally believed it. You see, in the end, blood isn't what makes a family. Blood can bind you to pain, to history, to expectations. But respect builds something stronger. Respect doesn't scream. It whispers, and its echo lasts longer than any name, any inheritance, any applause. I used to think I was born into the wrong family, but maybe I wasn't. Maybe I was just born to end its curse, to be the one who finally said, enough. And I did. That's my story, not of revenge, not of loss, but of reclamation, of a woman who stopped waiting to be seen and started seeing herself.